It is 7 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so welcome everybody to the June meeting of the Union Township Planning Commission. And roll call, please.
Buckley.
Here.
Gross.
Here.
Lapp. Oh, I'm sorry, she's excused. McDonald.
Here.
Olver.
Here.
Shingles.
Here.
Thering.
Here.
Squadrito.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay. As you know, we don't have a permanent secretary these days, and our vice secretary is not here tonight. So I don't know. I mean, we have a couple of agenda items, so we'll have some action items potentially. But do we need do we need to designate a person, or can we just let Tara take the minutes? I mean, she takes the minutes anyway, but.
If you need a designated placeholder to read Tara's notes, I'll be happy to do so,
Okay.
if that's how that works.
Yeah, I think so. I'm gonna suggest, kind of keep track of the motions so that, because if you're gonna be acting secretary, then essentially you'll get to review the minutes. I guess you get first review of the minutes and you ultimately have to sign them, so, but, okay, then I will use my extreme and exaggerated powers as chair to designate you as the acting secretary for tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. First item is approval of the agenda. So you have tonight's agenda in front of you. As I mentioned, there are 2 new business items on there, and really that's it. Are there any other items that anyone's aware of that needs to be on tonight's agenda? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Move to approve.
Support.
Motion was by Gross, second by McDonald to approve the agenda as prepared. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so agenda's approved. Next item is approval of the minutes from May 21st. So you have those in your packet. Did anyone have any corrections to the May 21st minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, motion by Olver, second by Shingles to approve the May minutes as prepared or as submitted. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so the minutes are approved. Next item is correspondence, board reports, and presentations. And first item is Commissioner Thering, updates from Board of Trustees.
Thank you. On our May 22nd meeting, I just highlighted one item. We dissolved the Mid-Michigan Aquatic Recreation Authority. Since that did not pass, unfortunately, that was no longer needed. So thank you to all of those, including Commissioner Shingles, who was on that committee. Our June 12th meeting, which was last Wednesday, I happened to be on vacation, but I did listen to the meeting the next day. There was an audit by Yo that overall went well, and the board began but did not complete the discussion on the private road ordinance. Oh, one other thing, there was they did an agreement for the Lincoln Road participation for the paving, 4-foot wide shoulders from Broomfield to Deerfield. A participation agreement with it'd be Union Township, the tribe, and the Isabella County Road Commission are all taking part in the funding of that stretch.
Okay. Any questions for Commissioner Thering on board-related matters? Okay, thank you. Next item is Commissioner Buckley, updates from ZBA. I don't guess you've met since last month.
We have not, no. So
Okay.
there's no new updates on the ZBA.
Okay. Any questions for Commissioner Buckley? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. There was a letter in your packet from the city of Mount Pleasant indicating their intent to update their master plan. Anything need to be said about that?
My understanding is that they're focused on the Mission Road corridor, that they're wanting to look at that again and look at it in more detail.
Okay, so I guess watch your social media, watch your email. There may be opportunities for input on that. There were several, or a couple at least, communications that were received to us that I asked to be included in the packet in the interest of transparency and making sure that, you know, we're conducting our business in public and so on. There was a letter from resident Gunning that came in a few weeks back, and then there was an email from Commissioner Shingles that I just asked to be included in the packet. There was also another letter from resident Gunning this afternoon that I also asked to be included. I don't know if you saw my email or not.
Not until right before the meeting.
Okay. Well, let's make sure it gets into the minutes, I guess, because it's essentially a communication to us, I guess, is the way I would do it. And then you also have, as usual, your community and economic development monthly report. Are there any questions from commissioners on the monthly report?
I did have one, but I think it's something we may have talked about. It's on page. It'd be page 3 of the report, just ordinance enforcement. I'm pretty sure we've talked about this particular subject, not necessarily the properties, the 971 East River Road and 2181 South Lincoln. And I'm just using these as an example because I know I believe they've been on here for a little while. So the township went ahead and took care of I'm assuming the tall grass, and the matter is now closed. But has there been communication that they're going to continue to keep it acceptable, or and like I said, if I'm just using them as an example, or was there no communication back from them and you just did it? Because that, in my mind, I would think then the matter isn't necessarily closed if there's been no communication.
So I appreciate the question. These properties have actually, I don't think they were on. Maybe they were on last month's, but they actually were on last year's report.
Maybe
about the same time.
maybe that's what it is.
The weed control ordinance is an ordinance that we enforce per the state law that governs this, basically starting May 1st and until the end of the growing season. And it talks about noxious weeds, and then it talks about essentially tall grass of a certain height being also in violation. And so that state act has a very specific process for notifications. We have to put a notice out broadly at the beginning of the year that the ordinance will be enforced. We also notify property owners that they have the problem, they need to fix it. If they don't fix it, then we have a contractor take care of the mowing. That's what was done, I believe, in both of these cases. Is our contractor mowed those lots. That charge is then charged to the property owner. If they pay it, wonderful. If they don't pay it, then at the end of the year it will end up on their tax bill. So from the perspective of ordinance enforcement, the completion of the mowing ends the ordinance enforcement. So that's why it says the matter is closed. From that point forward, it's up to the property owner
take care of things from there. If they don't, assume at some point later in the year, they might get to the point where the grass is in violation again, so.
So would you have to start over with the same process, or because you've already?
We always try to make sure to give, we always give people notice and let them know what the requirements are. And here again, we're following the state law that governs this, and so our ordinances are consistent with that state law and our ordinance that matches it.
Thank you.
Other questions on the monthly report? Okay, hearing none, we can move on. Are there any other reports that any commissioners have, or anything you're aware of that needs to be presented at this time? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. So we've reached the first public comment of the meeting. We always have a public comment towards the front end of the meeting, which is restricted to items that are not on the agenda for tonight. So if there's any member of the public who would like to comment on an issue that's not on tonight's agenda, they're welcome to do so at this time. If they're in the room, they can come to the podium, give us your name and address for the minutes, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. If we have anyone online, we can facilitate their speaking at this time. Is there anyone in our little room?
There's not.
Okay, so we don't have anybody online tonight. So public comment is open at 7:12. Okay, and seeing none, we'll assume that folks are here for other specific purposes, so we'll go ahead and close this public comment at 7:13. Okay, so we'll move to the new business items. We have two, as I mentioned. The first one is review of the proposed sidewalk and pathway ordinance update. You have in your packet a memo from Rodney dated June 11th, as well as a copy of the amended ordinance. So go ahead and turn, if there's anything you'd like to say in addition to the memo, Rodney, go ahead.
Well, thank you. Yes, everybody should have our memo dated June 11th. The updated draft ordinance is also dated June 11th. Just a couple of things. You can see in our report, second page of our report, page 25 of your packet. Down at the bottom, it lists the changes that are highlighted in the draft ordinance. There were some revisions to the paving standards. These were items that were recommended to us by the Township engineer. And the set of illustrations, which weren't ready for the initial draft that you have, they had them ready for this one, so they were also added in. Those were provided by the engineer. Revisions to section 9 or 10 are based on our discussion at our last meeting to clarify maintenance and repair and replacement responsibilities. So that those two sections have been updated to address the items that were discussed. There are a few typos in the ordinance that were identified. One was identified by our township attorney. That's the section that is essentially quoting the state act, section 4, that part B, where we have the powers of the township board. This section, as we talked about initially, we essentially brought from our current ordinance into this one. He noted in a follow-up email that the state act says that the time frame for this payment process is actually, the state act says 5 years. Our current ordinance says up to 10. We carried over the up to 10. He said, let's just make it 5 to match the law. The law doesn't really give us the leeway to go beyond the 5. So that's where you see that change from 10 to 5. It's simply to fully match the state law.
And we don't have the ability to change that?
That was his direction, was that the law does not give us leeway to adjust that. As we talked about previously, my suggestion with regards to that section is if you find you're ready to make a recommendation on this ordinance, I would simply have a motion. You may want to make it simply as a separate motion even, or you can make it part of your recommendation to make any comments you'd like to make on that subsection about whether it should be in there or not. As I said, the Board of Trustees, whether we have an ordinance or not, the Board of Trustees has these powers based on the 1931 law. But whether I think it's appropriate to have them in the ordinance because they match the law. But ultimately, it will be up to the Board of Trustees. It's really their powers, and it will be up to them to decide what they'd like to do with that part of the ordinance. It is certainly within your bounds to make recommendations, though. And so I would simply make that a part of any recommendations that you'd like to share with them.
I was just thinking, there are certain things like, for example, all the drain work that was done, that's maybe a 20-year to pay back. I mean, we're not necessarily talking apples to apples here, but I mean, it's still nonetheless.
You're asking a significant thing of our state legislature to be consistent in their decision making. We're simply dealing with different state laws. It's just like this law is adopted based on the Charter Township Act, whereas our zoning ordinance is based on the Michigan Zoning Enabling Act. They have very different requirements as to how to adopt them, what can be in them, and the scope of what is allowed. So in this particular case, the 1931 law had a 5-year time frame. Other laws have different time frames for things. Special assessment districts have their own set of standards. Each one is based on a separate state act.
Let me just clarify. So the version that we have tonight, am I correct that the changes that are shown with strike through in red and new text in purple, those are only the changes listed at the bottom of page 2 of the report or 25 of the packet?
That's correct, yes.
So earlier changes are not highlighted at this point?
No, the black text is what you saw at your last meeting.
Yeah.
Where we made changes, we showed it as either the blue underline or the red strike through.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the items that are listed in the report.
Okay, very good. Any other questions for Rodney right now? Obviously, he's not going anywhere, so. Okay, I guess we're ready to kind of get into it here then. So, thank you. We're either in commission discussion and questions or commission deliberation and action. So we don't have a motion on the floor yet. We can have discussion. It's really open for discussion.
I would like to make a statement. I don't know if I sent an email to just you and Rodney on my thoughts about this. Did you receive it?
I don't recall seeing one.
Maybe I didn't hit send.
No, I saw it.
Okay. I would have copied you on it because I think it would be important. And what I was asking was to table this because I didn't think it was what we as a board had asked for. But maybe, in looking back, maybe it was just my perception of what was going on. And going through the packet on this, I noticed like the question 2 on page 3, it has a quote from me. I actually did not say that. I did not say the word sidewalk ordinance. Now in all honesty, I can understand how that was interpreted because of maybe other people were talking about that as well, but actually I referenced to the conversation that Mr. Gunning had at the comment. And so in my mind, I was thinking that's what I wanted to talk about when a small business or any business comes forth that wants to do some small improvements. Lots of times there are things that are activated and sometimes it's a sidewalk or sometimes they have that list that you have to choose 3, and I think sidewalk is one of them, if I'm getting that right. And how can we maybe better help our I was thinking not just Mr. Gunning, but all business in general, that's what I was thinking in my mind. That's what I wanted to discuss. So how can we help other businesses without maybe, I think Mr. Gunning used the word trigger, and he referenced sidewalk, but I was thinking beyond sidewalk, there's other things. Allow them to do something small, which is an improvement all the way around, without having them to spend considerably more than what the cost of the improvement was. So that's kind of what I was thinking. So I understood how that interpretation would have come out, but that really wasn't what I was thinking from the beginning. I was thinking more of what Mr. Gunning was saying. So my email just to the two of you was to just, if I was correct in what I was saying, is that this is important and it's on here and it's done. But let's table it and let's get the information that we asked for. But then I had to take a step back going, well, maybe I was the only one that was asking for it. So that's all I really wanted to say. So.
If I may, just share a little bit more on that, because I didn't talk about the questions in here. I think those might come up just in our discussion. Certainly the discussion has been a mix of ordinance and policy. We have the sidewalk ordinance adopted in 2009. It's a general ordinance, applies across the township. It simply sets the standards for what sidewalks are, what pathways are, and has certain provisions. The current one has provisions for a committee and requirements for basic maintenance and that sort of thing. You can kind of think of it as the foundation as it relates to sidewalks and pathways in the township. And then we have this policy adopted in 2018. There's nothing in our 2009 ordinance that grants or references the ability to establish a policy for implementation. It's not there. We've adopted a policy, we've followed it, but we're not really entirely consistent with the current ordinance because the current ordinance doesn't have an allowance for that. One of the reasons to do this update was to address that, and because frankly the 2018 policy, whether you like every element of it or not, has functioned well to give relief where it's appropriate, to require sidewalks where it's most important to have them, and to give most importantly, I think, to give the applicant that's involved the opportunity in a public setting to make their case, and to have a public body make a decision related to that. So I think the policy has functioned in the way it was intended. Certainly, policies can always be amended, and frankly, they can be improved, just as we update our master plan regularly, which is a policy document. So, number one reason really to update this ordinance is to make it clear that we can have a policy for implementation, what that means, who adopts it, and what it can cover. And so that's really what that section 4, I think it's 4A, its first subsection is intended to do, is to say that we can have this process. The Planning Commission has a role in making recommendations ultimately, because it's a township policy. So the Board of Trustees would have a final approval as a resolution. But it is a policy for implementation, not an ordinance. And that also allows us to make adjustments to it relatively easily. There's not a hearing process. It's not a zoning ordinance where we have multiple steps. It can be adjusted relatively simply in the future if there's a need. But the key is with the ordinance is to get us in a place where we have a foundation under that policy that we don't currently have. The question of when things are required, what triggers, I think, as you said, the sidewalk.
And I'm not only referencing sidewalks, there's that list of things, and that's what I was thinking more broader than, I was thinking about Mr. Gunning, but I was thinking about there's many other people and many other things that involves.
Well, we'll talk about that. Let's talk about sidewalks and pathways for just a moment. Under the current sidewalk and pathway ordinance and under this proposed ordinance, sidewalks and pathways are simply required. Period. Anytime you have a general ordinance, it applies equally and broadly across the township. We don't have grandfathering situations that we talked about that was for the private road ordinance, similar. manner. That we don't have any protected class or anything like that because it's not a zoning ordinance. And it's only under zoning where you bring in this legal nonconformity type language, or grandfather, as it's called. Even that is not entirely helpful because in most cases under zoning, especially for sidewalks, it may not even apply. But this is general ordinances apply broadly across the township. They apply equally across the township, and that's where this policy then comes in to allow us within that structure to give some clarity and to be able to grant temporary relief from construction in certain circumstances, and also to indicate that certain areas like agricultural preservation areas are an area where we're not looking at constructing that. So even if something comes in with a site plan, for example, in an area that's planned for agricultural preservation, we would not ask for sidewalk construction because we have a policy that says that's not an area we're looking at. That's an implementation tool. That's what the policy is intended to do. And it allows us to work with this ordinance framework we have, but still also be able to work with individual property owners and developers and such. You see the site plans. In reality, the sidewalk ordinance applies broadly. If somebody builds a new house in a subdivision that has sidewalks, that new house would have to build a sidewalk in front if they don't. That lot doesn't have one already. But you see it mostly with site plans, and it is most of the time that's when it's applied, simply because as a site plan, it's a development project, and therefore the development-related ordinances, including our sidewalk ordinance, come into play. You talked about minor site plan. Minor site plan is kind of an odd term. I mean, it really is it means a site plan for a smaller project. It's building additions. It's parking lot expansions and certain things that need to have a site plan so we can see what's going on and make sure it complies with the ordinance. But we've identified in the ordinance. You identified in the ordinance when we adopted that ordinance in 2020. Certain projects that did not need to come before you. And that's really what minor site plan means, is it's something of a scale that the zoning administrator can review and take action on. That's still a development project. It still has a requirement to look at sidewalks and such like that as part of that, potentially. And we have dealt with that when projects have come in there where somebody might want to ask for temporary relief. We have suggested they do so. And we have then brought that plan to you. It's not cost the applicant anything more. They're paying the fee for an administrative review. But we have then brought that item to you to take a look at, just as we did, for example, with the Prestige Center and their landscape improvements. Certain elements of the minor site plan that needed your attention. And we would continue to do that. If there's other minor site plan projects that require a sidewalk, we'd certainly suggest that they'd like to pursue temporary relief. We would facilitate that by just putting it on the agenda and inviting them to make their case. So it's something where, as a general ordinance, we don't have the ability to say yes or no. It applies broadly, but we do have, especially if we adopt this new ordinance, clear ability to establish an implementation policy like the 2018 policy that gives us some ability to work with sites and grant. The current policy calls it provisional relief. We've called it temporary relief more often. So what is temporary? Well, we don't set a time on that. And I think there's some language in the current policy about when sidewalks are constructed around it. This one has to go in. But it's simply relief from construction so they can proceed forward without it. It shows on the plan, but they don't have to construct it. That arrangement works. There's not a way we can say necessarily in a general ordinance to be. We have to be consistent. We can't be arbitrary and say yes here and no there in the ordinance language. It just simply is an ordinance that applies generally across the township. So, from the perspective of what we were doing here in the review, it is necessary for us to update this ordinance to deal with things like that policy issue, and ability to have a policy. But there were other items, as you saw earlier. We didn't include that memo in this report, but you saw it earlier. We talked about this ordinance back in 2021, and we had a whole list of items that were in that November 2021 memo. It was talked about in November, December of that year. It got on the list update, but it got delayed. We were doing other things, and so we didn't get started with that project till now. But we did talk about those items and the need to update that ordinance even back at the end of 2021. This is simply a continuation of that process.
In your experience, does our approach to sidewalks prevent property owners, residential, commercial, et cetera, from doing some of the small improvements that they may want to do? Does it get in the way? Is it causing a problem?
Well, the question, that's one of the questions that was asked, and as we have noted, there were two projects. Mr. Gunning was one of them, down there on Broomfield Road. That section of Broomfield Road is designated in our current policy as one of the designated streets where the language of the policy says sidewalk relief should not be granted. There are two projects down there, both, I believe, both were minor site plans, I think. Tim Beebe's was as well, wasn't it?
Tim's was, Ben's
Okay, all right. But Ben didn't, Mr. Gunning didn't apply, but it would have been a minor site plan. In both cases, they could have come to you, and as we've done with others, we would have facilitated that by putting that plan, that item on the agenda for that consideration. In both cases, they chose not to do that. In Mr. Beebe's case, he chose to construct the sidewalk section. In Mr. Gunning's case, he chose to do something different, where he didn't have to deal with that question.
I want to provide an important distinction here because I've heard it happen just now. Commissioner Oliver asked about your feedback on our ordinance, and you gave feedback on the policy. And I think where the Planning Commission is getting confused, and last month it was easy to get confused because it was difficult to tell where the language for the ordinance ended and where the language for the policy started. We're having a conversation right now about the ordinance, and I would say that, based on the feedback that we've gotten in the packet and that sort of thing, I think there continues to be confusion about that. I find it not unusual at all that we would be brought with an update for an ordinance. But I think the more contentious issue, outside of the issue of the Michigan law that imbues the authority to essentially collect taxes for the construction of a future sidewalk. That language there, whether we include it or not, that is kind of a sticking point. But beyond that, it's not unusual to have this ordinance updated, and we did. We've asked for all of these things at some point. But I want to make sure that we're not flipping back and forth between ordinance and policy, because that's where I think we continue to get confused. And most of the contentious, and myself included, most of the contentious points that we're dealing with in terms of when relief is provided and those sorts of things is a matter of policy and not a matter of ordinance. So just to make sure we're clear, the agenda item we're talking about right now is ordinance and not policy.
Okay. So what was the answer to the question on, is the policy causing problems? Is that what you were asking?
Well, I think Commissioner Buckley points out correctly that there is confusion on ordinance versus policy, and I'm still learning the difference between the two.
Yeah. Okay.
I want to make sure we have good both.
Yeah.
Well, and I think your question is fair.
Oh, yeah,
But
I'd still
absolutely,
like to,
I'm not.
yeah.
I think your question is fair. I personally believe that the ordinance is much more, I think it's easier to come to agreement on the ordinance because the ordinance is governing, is the general language that is not too dissimilar than what we've always been using already, number one. And number two, it's actually including language that incorporates the Planning Commission into that process of reviewing the policy for sidewalks and pathways, which we are not currently listed in that ordinance. So generally speaking, I think that language is pretty tame for the most part. But again, that's where we start to jump. We start to jump into policy, and we have a lot of opinions about that. So, but I think Rodney did it without even recognizing that you said ordinance and you said policy. So,
And I did because really we're talking about implementation.
Right.
And largely implementation has been dealing with that policy question,
Right.
when to grant temporary relief and when not to.
right.
So the ordinance itself, as you said, is pretty simple. It simply sets out that we can require sidewalks and pathways to be constructed. The 1931 law says we can. That it sets out, as you said, it adds in some provisions giving the planning commission a more clear role in the planning process and in the policy process. And then beyond that, really, it simply provides some basic standards that in every sidewalk and pathway ordinance, in every local government that talks about maintenance and replacement and such, and then beyond that, there's some boilerplate fees and performance guarantees, whatever that would come as part of a project. That are the same as in any other development ordinance we have. So it's actually a fairly simple ordinance. I think even if you've seen the policy where we took some of your discussion that we've had, incorporated that into an updated policy document. You see there's a whole lot of strike through and underline there too. And as we tried to hit on some of the things you've been talking about, that's the more complicated conversation. But this ordinance on its face is actually fairly simple.
It's just your simple 14-page ordinance.
Well,
You know,
No,
but right next to you is our.
I'm being facetious. What's that?
I said right next to you is a several inch thick.
Well, yeah, the zoning ordinance is huge and other things. Okay, let me ask a question then. So one of the contentious issues that's been mentioned already is this issue about whether the township would ever require a property owner to post a cash deposit in lieu of construction, to quote from the text here. The ordinance as drafted clearly states may. What would have to happen if this were to be approved in this current form? What would have to happen for the township to do that? And specifically, what I mean by that is, could the township, on a case-by-case basis, decide, okay, you have to do this, or would it need to establish a policy for doing that?
Well, as you see here, it talks about having a fund. One of the sections here talks about a sidewalk boundary fund, then so you can pay into it rather than in lieu of actually constructing sidewalk. The board would have to take an action by resolution to set their policy. If they wished to go down this road, they would essentially have to take board action to set up the rules under which that would operate, whatever the requirements are, whatever the conditions are that they would accept payment in lieu of, for example. That would be done by policy. While it would probably come up in response to the request, the board's action would apply generally. It would not be a case-by-case basis. And again, it's very important in all that we do in local government that we do not act in an arbitrary or capricious manner, where we are picking winners and losers, and more important, where we might be treating applicant A in a different manner than applicant B when the conditions are the same. We need to make sure we behave in a consistent manner. And so let's just provide a scenario. Let's say a developer of a project that would prefer not to construct the sidewalks. They are willing to pay into a fund so they can construct it later. There are a variety of reasons why that might be necessary. It could be road construction about to happen. They're going to tear the roads up. It could be utilities or something that's going to be coming up soon. It could be for other things. It could be that the area that the sidewalks are required is sensitive topography or other sensitive vegetation there of some sort. and they have not figured out where they could, an alternate location for the sidewalk could be, something along the Prestige Center where they asked to relocate the sidewalk. And so they say, we'd like to come back for that, but we're willing to pay into a fund so you have the money already. Something like that, where a developer makes a request, and that request would ultimately go to the Board of Trustees, and under this provision, they can decide essentially whether they want to get into that. Anytime we set up a fund, we're creating another element of our bank account. We're creating more accounting that we need to take care of. We track that money. Just as with every development project, we have an escrow deposit where they pay into a fund to cover the costs of public hearing notices or our township engineers review time. And we track that all the way through the process, and at the end of the application, when it's approved or however it ends, we refund the balance. It would be something similar here. So the decision of the board is this something we want to have this additional administrative responsibility over?
Yeah.
So it's a lot of words. The example you gave is not particularly the concern of the Planning Commission. Somebody voluntarily paying into a fund because they don't know exactly what they want to do right now. I don't think anybody's got any concerns about a voluntary pay-in. The question is about being compelled to pay in, and so that's the issue at hand. I think, without putting words into Commissioner Squatrito's mouth, I think what he's saying is that regardless of whether this clause, this language, we know it's state law, so we know it's enforceable, regardless of whether it's in our ordinance or not. But I think what he's asking is that is the next step for the trustees to create policy as to, in the affirmative or negative, as to whether or not they plan to use that right, the right that they've been given by state law. Is a policy necessary in order to take action to compel somebody to pay into a fund for future sidewalk construction?
Let me just, and I apologize, Peter, for putting you on the spot, but I have a vague recollection that this may have actually come up before, where somebody's asked to pay in.
Yeah, it was from a developer for a project.
And this was a case where the Board of Trustees did what?
They didn't act on it, they didn't move.
Yeah. So essentially, at least a past Board of Trustees has taken an action. There's nothing, I'm sure it's in the minutes somewhere. But essentially, at this point, they have said no. Now, just as with anything, that can change.
Yeah, sure.
New board can make a different choice. But at this point, the answer is that.
But I think we're getting to a procedural question here. The procedural question being, is it necessary by the board to establish policy to govern that process first before they take action? Or can the board simply decide one night, just be out of dumb luck or whatever, that this person in front of them, whether it's a developer or otherwise, is going to be compelled to pay in?
Well, again, that would be an arbitrary action or capricious action in the sense that if they're acting in, they can say it's rash action, various things, but arbitrary and capricious is the legal language. You hear a lot in the zoning board of appeals. That if the zoning administrator behaves in an arbitrary and capricious manner, the board of appeals is right to overturn them. This board in this community has operated for quite a number of years now under what's called policy governance. And you can see it on our website. It's posted there in a couple of different places. We have a policy governance manual that the board has adopted, and that they regularly review and amend. Throughout the course of the year, they review the entire set of policies. And some policies govern the behavior of the township administration, basically the township manager, and through him, the rest of us. Some policies reflect the relationship between the board and the owners, which are the residents and other property owners. And then some policies govern the board itself and how they have decided and agreed to work. And so essentially that's how the board operates right now, is through policies. And so this would be simply another policy choice that they would make.
So is it fair to assume then that because this question is before us and because we are going to ultimately make a recommendation on an ordinance at some point, whether it's in its current form or some future form, is it fair to assume that whether or not that clause, that language is in this ordinance that we recommend that the trustees will be taking up this issue to create their policy proactively?
Well, this language is in the current 2009 ordinance. And there is no.
The statute language,
Yeah,
that portion
we
of,
carried this over from the 2009 ordinance.
well, I thought that this language was new. I thought the attorney suggested that we include that portion of that
No,
language.
this is in the 2009, the current ordinance. We carried it over from the current ordinance. What the attorney suggested is that we needed to correct that 10-year business back to 5 years, because that was not consistent with the state law. But the language is in the current 2009 ordinance. There's not any difference between the two.
Okay, that's my mistake. I thought that we were debating whether or not we should include language on that, even though it's state law, include whether or not we wanted to actually articulate that in our particular ordinance.
It's in the current ordinance. I apologize. I said it was the same. It's not exactly the same. Item B2, which is the language that says the Board of Trustees may also forward a proposed order to the Planning Commission with a request for review and recommendation. That was added. We cut that in, just to make it clear. You have a planning role for sidewalks and pathways, that even in this area, they could invite you to comment.
So that's the crux of the issue that we're at right now. The crux of the issue is adding that language. I mean, I'm ambivalent about that. It's state law. There's any lawyer, a township attorney that's going to be advising the trustees is going to, anybody that's worth their salt is going to know about that statute anyway. So it's not like it's a right that they have. Again, I think what the most important aspect of this is an issue that we don't have direct control over as a planning commission. We cannot compel the trustees to create policy that would discourage the use of that right or encourage it. We can only advise or recommend. I do think the planning commission is generally in agreement that we don't view the township as being in the business of compelling people to pay into a fund. It's just that this body doesn't have direct control over that.
So you just said it, but I just want to make sure I absolutely understand it. So on page 30 of the packet, page 2 of the policy, I guess,
The ordinance.
of the ordinance, I'm sorry. Yes, I don't want to use the wrong word. Section 4B, 4 and 5 were carried over as I'm seeing them from the 2009.
Actually, section 4B, which is this provision now titled Provisions for Sidewalk or Pathway Orders and Assessments of Cost. That language, with the addition of a suggestion that the board could ask you for recommendations on orders, which is subsection B2. That section B was carried over from the current ordinance. Section A, 4A, which is the adoption of sidewalk or pathway construction policies, that is new. This is the language that enables us to have the 2018 policy
Yeah.
and any future policy that we have.
Yeah, but the language that says that the township can establish a construction fund, that the property owner may be required to post a cash deposit, the thing we've been talking about with regard to whether you'd need a policy for it or not, those were already in the
Yes.
09.
Yeah, they are currently they're in the current ordinance and they are in the state law.
Okay.
Because section 4.0B is in accordance with the Public Act in the state law, is it necessary to have in the ordinance, or is that just redundant and points to a potential enforcement that might not otherwise be considered if it's not in the ordinance?
Yes, it is best if it is in the ordinance, because that makes it clear what we operate under. I'll give you an example related to zoning. Under the State Zoning Act, the state legislature has preempted our local authority in a number of areas. One of the odd ones is in relation to arts and craft classes. There is a provision in the state act that requires us to allow arts and craft classes with up to, I think it's 5 students per class, to happen in a private residential home without any permit, no approval, no special use permit or anything like that. So If we didn't have that in our ordinance, we would still be obligated to follow it, because the state act says we must. But if we don't have an ordinance, it would be very easy to forget that we're obligated to do that. Now that's an obligation. This is a little different. This is a you may, but it's really the same thing. It's best if it's in the ordinance to make clear what authority, in this case, what authority the Board of Trustees has. Just as we have language in here that gives what authority you as a planning commission have. Because in reality, we don't read the state act every day. I don't go and read the zoning act every day. But I do read our zoning ordinance on a regular basis, and Peter Gallaudet reads it every day. He's enforcing it all the time, administering the elements of it all the time. So it is really best to have these kinds of things in the ordinance. In our case, by the way, that provision is in our home occupation section. So it really is best to have it in our ordinance. I understand the concern about it. I understand that our Board of Trustees does operate under this policy governance model that they have been doing for 2008 or 2009, something like that. And that every year they review all of the policies. Basically at least once a month, they are reviewing sections of that governance policy manual and making determinations as to whether this is, first of all, determining are we following it. Secondly, are there things that we need to adjust? Is there something new that we need to look at? Then every 4 years, which will happen this fall, after the election, because all the board members are up for election this year. So after the election, there'll be an item on the first agenda that will ask that new board to reaffirm their support for following the policy governance manual as a whole. So this is a board and community that governs consistently by policy, and I just suggest that it's something that we can have pretty good faith in, I think, in that sense, because they have been consistent with that.
Out of curiosity, what would happen if the new board did not opt in favor of that policy governance approach that we used?
Well, the policy governance manual would be set aside, and they would have to
And
then
then
decide what they'd like to do
Back
from
to
there.
ordinances and starting from there.
Yeah, I mean, the policy governance manual, as I said, the first thing it does is it governs the relationship between the board and their employee as a policy is defined, which is the township manager. And through the township manager, the administration, the staff, the rest of us. It defines the role and responsibilities between the two of them. That's very important. That can be a challenging relationship.
Sure.
And because of the policies that have been put in place, it's not, because it functions very well. Secondly, it defines the relationship between the board and their, what they call their owners. In this model, policy governance model, the owners in our case are the residents and property owners. So it defines that relationship and the board's responsibility to the owners, which by the way includes you. You are part of the ownership of this township. And then, like I said, the third piece defines how they are going to all behave as a board and as individual board members. So it sets governors on what they do. They're self-imposed, but nonetheless, they have agreed to follow those things. And it does function very well, and it has created an environment that has relieved a lot of potential problems. I have worked in a number of communities where boards are at each other's throats. Where, boards and planning commissions or boards and staff are not on the same page. And so this policy governance manual, I think, is and the decision to govern through policies is the key to the success of being a township.
Rodney, I've got a couple of thoughts that I don't want to get too far off on a tangent. We don't have to dive too deeply, but you had mentioned earlier that in the absence of a policy that relates to compelling someone to construct or pay into a sidewalk construction fund, that it would be acting in a capricious manner to simply impose that upon somebody without having some sort of policy that might govern how that it might be, how we might go about those things. And you said that if they act in a capricious manner, it would go to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And I'm sorry. That they could take it to the Zoning Board of Appeals?
No, I apologize. The arbitrary and capricious language is in the State Zoning Act,
Mhm.
when somebody appeals an action, an administrative action,
Mhm.
whether administrative action of this planning commission related to a site plan, or administrative action of township staff related to a zoning permit or some enforcement, if an appeal is taken to the Board of Appeals, there are 4 reasons for that administrative decision to be overturned by the Board of Appeals. And one of them is that the action taken was arbitrary or capricious. This is not, the board, this is not a zoning ordinance, and the board has no.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're
administrative
right,
action
right,
over
right,
the
right,
zoning ordinance.
right.
So I'm just.
It would be a staff decision. It's, okay, I get it, staff decision, and it could go to the ZBA. Is there a fee to go to the ZBA?
Well, as I said, this would not go to the zoning board of appeals. I'm saying that I'm simply using that.
I'm sorry, okay, so when you say, you say Board of Appeals, I'm thinking zoning Board of
There is
Appeals.
no other board of appeals.
Okay.
It's construction board of appeals. It doesn't apply to this.
Okay.
This doesn't have an appeal process for it. It's a general ordinance, so it does not have, it's not a zoning ordinance that goes to the Board of Appeals. It's not the construction codes, the Michigan Building Code, which has a process where people go to the construction board of appeals. This is a general ordinance. It does not have an appeal process. What I'm saying is that when I say arbitrary and capricious, I apologize for creating confusion. I'm simply referencing that zoning has that same terminology. That under zoning, we cannot behave in an arbitrary or capricious manner. In the same way here, the board frankly doesn't behave in that manner because they operate under this policy governance model. And frankly, they have been very consistent in their choices to operate from a policy point of view, where they establish a policy that then is followed.
So when you mentioned ZBA, you were basically just giving an example
Exactly.
of where, somewhere else where these same things come into play.
Where, yes.
Okay. So
I apologize for
it's
the-
not like a,
So in reality, if the Board of Trustees were to act to compel somebody to pay into a fund in the absence of a policy, there is no recourse. Outside of civil litigation, there's no recourse for the applicant that's being asked to pay in.
I understand where you're going.
Yeah.
This. I don't accept it, and I would recommend that you reject this direction. First of all, it's absolutely completely hypothetical. It does not exist in reality. We have a member of the Board of Trustees with us. I'm not going to ask him to tell you that, but I will tell you that I think the direction you're going is so far beyond hypothetical that it is not relevant to our conversation. If you feel that the section 4B, these elements that come out of 1931 law, should be removed, my suggestion is simply make it part of your recommendation to the Board of Trustees. But ultimately, to continue to pursue the hypothetical and beyond hypothetical, it's not.
Yeah, no, I mean, you've helped to clarify now, but the way you stated it previously suggested there was an appeal process. So that's why we're having this conversation now.
I understand where you're going. I apologize. It was not intended to go there. But
All right, so
not being clear.
my next question is that, again, I am ambivalent about whether or not we include this in the ordinance because I fully appreciate the fact that it's state law and that we cannot, there's no avoiding this. But is the planning commission, we're recommending ordinance to the Board of Trustees. So we're recommending this language. So we're not approving this language. Because we're recommending language, is it reasonable for the planning commission, in conjunction with that language being included, is it reasonable for the planning commission to recommend language that the Board of Trustees adopt a policy that governs that specific process? Can we just add language that says that we recommend it?
Your role here is to review this ordinance.
Yeah.
Make a recommendation on it. You have a separate role, next item on the agenda, to review the policy and make a recommendation on it. I would be very leery of suggesting to you that you have a role to tell the Board of Trustees what they should do beyond that.
But we're not. I'm saying it's a recommendation.
It's just a recommendation. It's
not
like a
Mr.
recommendation
Chairman, I
like anything else that we
I think
recommend.
that if in terms of your recommendation here would be to simply say, I mean, it could be as simple as take out Part B. That we don't recommend Part 4B be included in the ultimate ordinance that's adopted. That could be your recommendation. That's consistent. That's making a recommendation on this ordinance. I don't believe you have the authority to tell the board what policy they should adopt.
We're not.
Other
No,
than
hold.
what this ordinance.
We're not recommending
I
what
think
policy.
I think
We're
it's-
recommending a policy be
Yeah.
created.
Right, that's,
Correct.
you are recommending, I'm just suggesting you stick with the ordinance. You can get where you wanna go simply by making a recommendation as specific as you'd like about this section 4B, if that's what you'd like to do. There's no reason to go beyond that, because you can simply say it should be taken out, as was asked.
But the Board of Trustees can simply say it should be taken out. We are only recommending language. We can recommend something and they can totally disregard it. We can recommend all of the language and they say, we want to start from square one, scratch it, let's start over. I mean, I'm at a loss for this one, Rodney. I don't understand why you're against us recommending to the board that they just they review and adopt a policy.
Well, and I think.
2021
Yeah.
was the last time we talked about implementing this. We're 3 years later, and now we're still looking at an ordinance. How many years will it take for the board to address a policy that is a concern, not just to people in this room, but a concern to the community in terms of being compelled to pay into a fund for a sidewalk? So,
As I said, right now, the answer that has been before the board, a board of trustees, whether it's the current group of 7 or a previous group, the answer was no. We don't want to get into that area. So right now, the answer, if anybody asked, the answer would be that the board has said no. If you'd like to ask them.
so
the
why
board
is there a
asked.
fear? Why is there a fear then to actually institutionalize that in the form of a policy?
My suggestion to you is that you have been given the task of making a recommendation of this ordinance. Simply put it in terms of this ordinance. And if you don't like this section, you prefer that this language not be there, simply recommend that it be removed. That will address the issue. And
Okay.
that way, you're within the scope that you have been invited to take, which is to make a review and make a recommendation.
But our
of this ordinance.
public recommendation sends a message to the community, to the staff, and to the Board of Trustees that we feel this is important. And that is our right as a planning commission. So, Mr. Chairman, I would move to recommend to the Board of Trustees that the proposed sidewalk and pathway ordinance with a draft date of June 11th, 2024 be adopted as presented with the following additional changes. Striking section 4B until such time as a policy is adopted for its implementation.
Support.
Question. You said section 4B, that's including points 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Correct.
Let's just, I want to understand.
Or are we just wanting the 0.5?
Originally, I thought 4 and 5, but I think the whole section, if it's outlined by the state law, that would circumvent anything in the first place if the board chose to do so, and it's redundant to have it placed here. It also gives the opportunity for that consideration to be planted in the mind, which Mr. Nanny suggested could be an issue.
Okay.
So I would strike the entire section, and that's what the motion is.
I'll be honest, Commissioner Oliver, I'm not sure that I'm supportive of striking the entire section. I'm looking specifically at supporting the striking of that specific language. But I don't have any particular concerns with the entire section, outside of the questionable language.
Are you withdrawing your second?
Unless there's an amended motion, I would withdraw my second on that.
Okay.
I'm open to the friendly amendment if you want to go that route.
Sure. He's open to an amendment.
Okay. Well, do you want to do you want to amend your motion on the fly?
I will amend the motion on the fly to strike section 4.0B, numbers 4 and 5, until such time as a policy is adopted for their implementation.
Support.
Okay. Tara, did you get that? Are
I
you,
think I got most of it, but I can rewatch the tape. I have striking, section 4B, or section 4B, 4 and 5, until a policy is adopted, and then I didn't hear what the rest was.
For its implementation.
okay. And,
And then the board can do what it wishes from there.
yeah, so, go ahead, Commissioner Theron.
Can there's a motion on the floor. Am I allowed to ask a question of the motion on the floor?
Yes, absolutely. We're in discussion of the
So-
motion.
and I apologize if you've answered this, a lot's been going, I've been concentrating here. You talked about being a general ordinance with no appeal process. Who has the last word?
Well, if we're getting back to implementation, I mean, so we're getting back to the policy. Under the policy, if this ordinance is adopted, which enables this policy we already have, in many cases, it would be this body as planning commission. If somebody's asking for relief, frankly, if somebody's not asking for relief, they simply follow the ordinance.
Yeah, I read that. Okay, so okay.
But you're asking, there's a difference between the us granting, can we grant relief? And can my assumption is the board can still compel somebody to pay into a fund should the board choose to, or is that only based on our recommendation? Or do we recommend that the board compel somebody? Or do we provide the relief and then the board doesn't question it? Because I think your question is, who has the final say when someone is being compelled to pay into a fund?
No, I'm saying just in, whether it's the fund or being asked to build a sidewalk, or if they're asking for just, period, whatever question it be, and they want to appeal it, who has the last say to that question, whether it be what you just said, whether it be anything. Who has the last say? And you're telling me that it would be the planning
You have
commission.
to understand, this ordinance does not set out any kind of sidewalk permit or sidewalk site plan process. Because it's simply saying, here are the rules that apply to sidewalks and pathways. Here's how you construct them. Here are the minimum standards for construction. Here are the minimum standards for maintenance, minimum standards for replacement. Those are the pieces of the puzzle. There's a permit section in here that simply references other ordinances.
So I jumped to the
So
policy.
we're really back to the
Okay, so strike
Right.
that question because,
Yeah.
But it's a
This is
fair,
different.
but it's a fair question.
Yeah.
It's a fair question because the board has imbued by the state of Michigan, the board has the right to compel somebody to pay into a fund, whether we choose to do so or not. When does the board take action on that? Is it a case, because the planning commission clearly has no intention of compelling somebody to pay pay into a fund without the construction. We might compel somebody to actually build the sidewalk. But-
If you look at section 4, as the language you're talking about, it says the board may order construction by resolution, repair, whatever. Number 1 says the board shall hold a public meeting and notify the property owners that might be affected of the date, time, and place of that meeting. And then, as I said, they can forward it to the planning commission. And then beyond that, it has the language of the various things, various ways the board can take action. But the very first thing is the board has to hold a public meeting and invite those that might be affected to participate in that and provide their comments and whatever may come of that public input process. So none of this is arbitrary, none of this is done in secret. For the board to do it, they first have to have this public process. The other thing I will say is before the board even does this, they really have to be asked. This is very likely to be coming because somebody asked, like the case that Mr. Gallivan talked about, where a developer was interested in
last
paying
sentence, if rejected.
that developer was interested and therefore went to the board and asked.
But that's a policy.
And so if that typically that's how this would come up, is the board simply just has to consider something.
Yeah,
And that
but
might
that,
come from you, it might come from somebody else.
right, but that isn't the scenario that's described in B5.
And I would argue that B1 does not actually, the public meeting is talking about pathway construction, repair, and maintenance. Part 5 is talking about requiring a property owner to post a cash deposit in lieu of construction.
You have to understand this section operates together, just like the same language in state law operates together. And you go, it's common in ordinances and laws, go from the general to the specific. So you have the general statement up at the top that says the board has this authority to do things. And then you start down from there, that if they're going to do it, they need to take this first step. Then they can take a second step, which is potentially give it to you and ask you for your comments. And then only then can they make determinations. So it's general to specific in how this works. And it's the same thing in our zoning. it's the same process in each section of the zoning ordinance. It
But-
goes from general to specific.
I get what you're saying, but number 5 is talking about payment in lieu of construction. Number 2, the step number 2, where it's saying that they may forward a proposed order to construct a new sidewalk or pathway to the planning commission with a request for review. That is an order to construct, not an order to payment in lieu of construction.
This is all in order to do something with regards to sidewalks and pathways.
Is it fair to say that in certain circumstances, there, you would want the order to propose the construction of a sidewalk, and in certain circumstances, that isn't feasible at the moment, so that's when the order to pay into the fund would be appropriate, right?
And see, for you, I mean, the order would be to construct. I mean, otherwise, there's nothing to do. If they're not ordering the sidewalk to be constructed, there's nothing that property owner has to do. Period. I mean, there has to be some reason why this is even cannot, so that's why the language is order to construct, or, the other ones are repair or maintain. The order starts that process that then could lead to other alternatives, rather than simply, hey, go do this, and you have 90 days to get it done. These other alternatives are, well, we could consider this other thing, payment in lieu of. We could consider this other thing, payment into a township-wide fund, where you now are relieved of the burden of constructing, and we'll use that money somewhere else. Those are basically what 4 and 5 are talking about. And so, but this is not, you can't look at it as each section, each subsection, as a separate creature. They're all part of B. And just as the same language as part of the state act in that order, from general to specific. So in order for the board to act, they have to take these steps, the first one of which is public meeting and notify those affected property owners, giving them the opportunity to speak. We added part number 2, which is they may ask you to have your comments. And even though your comments are talking about an order to construct, your comments can include, hey, we don't think that's a good idea, there's no need to construct that there. Why don't you look at other alternatives?
Can the Board of Trustees, because it's may and not shall, can the Board of Trustees go from number 1 to number 5?
They have to follow the law. They have to follow.
That's not the question I asked. The question is, can they go from number 1 to number 5? They're not required.
They are not required to give you
Okay.
anything, because
Right.
the 1931 law doesn't require them to.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I get that's the law, but
I mean,
again.
that's really the case with the current sidewalk ordinance. That was the complaint this commission has had, that the sidewalk and pathway committee, under the 2009 ordinance, appeared to be making its recommendations to the Board of Trustees, not to the Planning Commission. Now, when I came on board, and Peter and I sat down and looked at various things, we looked at this ordinance, and I looked at it, I said, really, this committee should be a committee of the Planning Commission. Prior to that, the Board of Trustees had been appointing those committee members. And I said, we need to bring this back to the Planning Commission. This is really a planning topic. This committee, the Planning Commission has the authority to create committees. This committee should be a committee of the Planning Commission. And we were able to make that adjustment with the Board of Trustees' support, so that the Planning Commission appointed the committee members, and the committee's focus got turned to you. We didn't change the 2009 law, we just changed the focus of where the Planning Commission, or where this committee was aimed, and gave you the ability to make the appointments to that committee. It's really the same kind of thing here. With this section, sure, the Board of Trustees could hold their public meeting, skip talking to you, and go right on to deciding what they want to do. Absolutely, that's what the law says they can do, that's what this corresponding language says. Frankly, the Board of Trustees could have skipped talking to you about this ordinance entirely. This is under the Charter Township Act. They adopt it. They hold a first reading, they hold a second reading. In between the two, there's a notice that goes in the newspaper, and it's posted on a website and here at the hall, and then they can adopt it. Now, that's not what they wanted to do, and they've been very clear on that, both with the private road ordinance and this ordinance, that they wanted your input because you are involved in this process and because you have experience in dealing with development issues, and a lot of experience dealing with sidewalks. But they didn't have to. we can't, that's where I'm saying the Board of Trustees has certain authority to act. They have chosen to do things in this manner, and that certainly, I support it. I think it's great that ultimately they do have the authority to act.
So it's starting to feel like we're beating things with a dead horse at this point, and it's just going around and around and around. And maybe we could try to like clarify things and just boil it down to something kind of simple, because I think some of us are maybe really actually upset with the 1931 law, and maybe some of us are kind of not liking the ordinance, and then some of us are maybe thinking we don't like the way the board would apply that ordinance. So I think we're all kind of just having these three conversations, and we're just going around in circles, and we need to kind of hone in on what are we trying to change here? What are we trying to recommend? We can't change the law.
I would point out too, Commissioner McDonald, I didn't want to cut you off while you were speaking,
No,
but
that's
we
fine.
did have a call to question over here, so.
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I want to respect the call to question if we haven't.
Yeah, which I am trying to remember my Robert's Rules of Order. I think we are obligated to move to a vote. Is that your understanding of
I
that?
understand.
Okay, well, I just want to say before we do so, I think that was premature because I think I had a few more questions, but question has been called. So you want to read the motion one more time? It's been a while.
All right, it was a motion to recommend to the Board of Trustees that the proposed sidewalk and pathway ordinance with a draft date of June 11th, 2024 be adopted as presented with the following additional changes: striking 4B, number 4 and 5, until a policy is adopted for its implementation.
Okay, so the motion was made and it was seconded, and so we'll proceed to the roll call vote.
All right, Baring,
No.
Gross,
Yes.
McDonald,
No.
Squadrito,
Yes.
Buckley,
Yes.
Shingles,
Yes.
Olver.
Yes.
All right. 5 yeses, 2 noes, motion carries.
Okay, motion carries. Okay, and of course, that's a recommendation that we've now made to the Township Board. So now we'll move on to item B. Item B is review of the proposed sidewalk and pathway construction policy update. So again, you have a memo from Rodney, and you also have, which begins on page 42, and you have both a marked up and a clean copy of this. All right, so again, I'll turn it over to Rodney for an introduction.
Thank you, and I remember what David Juden called. You have a copy of the marked up copy of the proposed resolution, policy resolution, and you also have a clean copy where the changes have been incorporated, just make it a little easier to read. I'll go over this in a little bit more detail than we did with the last one. The first item in our report, the first subheading there is this is a policy, not an ordinance. And I think that's a very important statement to make. This is, you can call it a guideline. Policy is a set of guidelines. And so sometimes it's been confused with an ordinance that's been treated like an ordinance. The 2018 policy has been treated like an ordinance. It really is not. It's a guideline. I think we talked about previously that, for example, on the designated streets business, although the policy says not to grant temporary relief on designated streets, we had at least 2 cases where we did that. And there were good reasons for doing that. The applicant made a compelling statement on that, and ultimately they were given that temporary relief. So as I said, it's a guideline. We've already talked about the enabling authority, adopting the updated ordinance, provides us with enabling authority to have this policy. Some of the deficiencies that we talked about in the current 2018 policy had to do with designated streets, which streets should be identified as designated streets are basically the streets where it's a very high priority to have sidewalks or pathways constructed. Whether we use the 2018 language and say we shouldn't be granting any relief there, no matter what, we're saying these are the highest priority streets in the community to have sidewalks and pathways constructed. The question is, which streets should those be? That's something that is absolutely worth considering. It's a planning topic, and it's a topic we will likely be talking about further as we work on a master plan, but this is really part of the master plan update. The policy doesn't talk about where a pathway should be constructed versus a sidewalk constructed, which is a pretty significant question. Where is it appropriate to do one over the other? The policy does not address easements. And this has actually been a pretty significant weakness. Easements are a challenge for us. Our County Road Commission, I think I've talked about this before, our County Road Commission does not get additional right-of-way when they widen roads. I don't know why. I've never seen another road commission like this. Every other county I've worked in, the road commission wants very wide rights-of-way. They want 120-foot right-of-way so they can put in their boulevard in the future someday. For Isabella County, they have taken the tack of we only want right-of-way if we absolutely need it to be able to construct something. And even in that case, sometimes they'll do a grading permit to do a little grading work outside of the right-of-way and then move on. So we have roads like Pickard here, 4 lanes wide, that is within a 66-foot wide right-of-way, which means that there's only a couple of feet outside of the curb that's still within the county road right-of-way. Not enough to be able to put sidewalks in. Bluegrass Road, Broomfield Road, or other ones like that, where there's simply no room within the right-of-way to construct a sidewalk, which means we need a separate easement. And nothing in our policy talks about trying to get those easements as part of development projects. The fourth bullet point there, we have a policy, and I think this language about where no car, pedestrian injury, or fatalities occurred for a distance of 1 mile. This is really the reason the 2018 policy came to be. We had a fatality. I think that was largely the impetus, as I recall, for how the 2018 policy came to be. The challenge is this language is just about completely unenforceable. We have no mechanism to work with the police agencies to keep track of when accidents happen, when fatalities happen. And this language also talks about that there's an expectation there'd be a determination of the need of the pedestrian to walk in the roadway. Well, we're basically asking that to try to figure out what that dead person's motivation was to be in the roadway. Neither us nor the accident investigator can figure that out, but nonetheless, that's part of our policy language. So we have proposed to take this item out entirely, and I know this is a sensitive topic, but we propose to take it out because we really should be working in terms of what we do. This is an implementation policy. We need to be working in areas where we actually can implement it, and this is not one we really can actually implement effectively. The last bullet point on page 2 of our report, page 43 of your packet, talks about kind of a blanket policy to grant relief in the industrial districts. And this, from my perspective, is counterproductive. I actually would recommend that making connections to our industrial areas, our employment centers, it should be one of our highest priorities. It is one of our highest priorities in our DDA districts, our East DDA district in particular, where we have industrial development, because we're trying to connect people to the employment. And we do have a lot of folks that get around without a car. They get around on the scooters, they get around on bikes, they get around walking. And so to have sidewalks that connect into the industrial areas actually should, in my opinion, should be a high priority. So we have proposed to remove that option to grant relief solely because the property is in an industrial district. There certainly are other reasons to grant relief in some cases, but not solely because it's in an industrial district, at least as we proposed it. The language about an unimproved road is another reason to grant relief. I think this was trying to get at the idea of the rural areas or agricultural areas. We do not have any unimproved roads in the township. I think the idea was a gravel road, but those are improved roads. The county would be very offended, the county road commission would be very offended if we call their gravel roads unimproved. So we have proposed language to get there in a different way than unimproved road. And then the last one there, the last bullet point, and this is what we dealt with on Remus Road with the two items that we give temporary relief. There are times when on corner lots and such where constructing a sidewalk on one corner requires the construction of a curb return or sidewalk ramp on the opposite corner. So there's a place of refuge for that pedestrian when they cross, even if there's no sidewalk on the other side. And what that means is that applicant, that developer, essentially is required to construct off-site improvements. It's not part of their property. They don't own it. In one of the cases that was granted relief, it's not even in our jurisdiction. It was in the city on the other side of Bradley Street. And so we propose to add a policy that addresses that item. And we propose to add it in exactly the way that this body granted relief to the two cases in this room. So with that in mind, those are the deficiencies. And I've highlighted a few of the things we've proposed to add in this policy. One of the big ones was there on page 3 of our report, is to update the list of designated roads. By the way, changing the language. In the township, we don't have streets, we have roads. So we're just going to call it designated roads. That's my recommendation for that. So we did reorder the list so that we listed all the east-west roads first and then all the north-south roads second. And we also reordered the language so they all go from east to west or from north to south consistently, that, in terms of where we're describing each one. We did propose to add a section of South Isabel Road going north from M20. We're proposing all the way up to Delfield, which is a river road that goes up by the Mount Pleasant Airport. All that land north of 127 around the airport is industrial zoning, virtually all of it. I think there's a small piece that's commercial. So again, from the idea of connecting to employment center, and particularly to Delfield, which is one of the largest employers in Isabella County, and certainly one of the, I think, maybe the largest or one of the largest private employers in Isabella County. Having that connection to that facility and into that industrial area, I think has value to at least consider. We did delete a section of Crawford Road, and for reasons noted there, that we had a project already underway with the city. For that, we proposed to add Crawford Road from Broomfield down south to Deerfield. This is a very challenging spot to construct sidewalks, and it's all developed, essentially the parts of the township are all developed with single-family homes. But there's value in identifying that as a high priority, since it was a stretch of road that was really the impetus for this policy in the first place. And the last one was to add Broadway from end to end. Interesting to note that Broadway was not a designated road or street in the 2018 policy. It is a very busy road from a pedestrian perspective. We have Mid-Michigan College at the east end of it. We have, of course, much of it's in the city, but anyway, as we proposed it to include it as a designated street, to recognize it is busy. This is also the easiest route to connect the city and the township to the tribal area, the tribe's headquarters. That's in Chippewa Township. Obviously we can't go beyond Somerton, but that is the direct connection across, the easiest connection across, other than Pickard, for pedestrians to head over to the tribe's offices and such. So beyond that, you'll see some things that are we've already talked about there with the state or county road authorities. Page 4, page 45 of the packet, up at the top, note there, we propose to delete the language that says the planning commission will not grant a developer or owner of a parcel with frontage on designated streets relief from construction. That's the current language. We're proposing to remove that. And instead, what we're proposing to do is to add, and you'll see it in here, essentially on a designated street, there's an additional requirement, or additional guideline. And we can, when we get to the policy language itself, you can see this was kind of our solution to try to get at treating designated streets as important, but still providing the ability for you as planning commission and potentially the zoning administrator for administrative projects, the ability to actually look at these sites, including designated streets, and consider granting of relief based on consistency with the policy language. The other policy pieces that have been added is some language about easements. When you read it, you'll see the word should, not shall or must. We can't compel people to give us an easement. We can invite, we can encourage, we can suggest, but we can't compel it. We can buy the easement. That we can do, but even then we cannot compel them to sell it to us unless we are, get into a process of eminent domain where we go to court on the matter and a judge compels them to sell it to us. So the language in the policy is should and encourage and that sort of thing for that reason. And then the piece of the puzzle in the pathway is a policy about when pathway construction is appropriate. So with that in mind, I'm happy to answer questions about the report, about the policy. We tried to bring into this updated document the discussion we've been having. And as I said, to a large extent, our goal was to broaden the options for people to be able to consider, options for you to consider relief, but more importantly, options for an applicant to be able to bring a request for relief to you.
Okay. Before we open it for questions from commissioners, I just want to point out what I think may be a couple of typos. I'm not really sure.
That does happen.
On the bottom of page 2 of the proposed policy, you struck out the part dealing with the mile, like a mile, but in the next paragraph under 2, we say if on a corner lot, the mile will extend in both directions. It doesn't seem relevant anymore.
Ah, I see, okay, yep. Yeah, so basically deleting that second sentence is what you're suggesting.
Yes.
I would agree with that, yeah.
Yeah.
Because this item 2 was essentially a separate policy. It sort of overlapped with that.
Yeah.
But
But I think I think if that sentence is omitted, it retains its meaning.
yep.
And then on the bottom of page 3, under C, the fourth line, I think when it says recording of, I think the of is unnecessary.
Okay. I am always happy to delete words. Simplicity, clarity is better when you can do it.
Now, I'm sure, I have questions, but I'm sure other people have questions as well, so I'm opening it for questions. Questions or comments?
My only concern, I don't know if it's a concern, the only thing I would really like to make sure that is in this is that there's an appeal process no matter the situation. And I'm just looking at page 49, number 7. It talks about for development or construction projects, but I gotta believe if we thought real hard, we could think of a handful of other whatever situations. Even though they may lose the appeal, I think it's important that any and all people have the right to appeal.
So we could actually delete the words development or construction and it would not change the language at all. Because what we're really talking about here is projects that the zoning ordinance says are subject to minor site plan approval. So it doesn't,
I mean, that's fine. However, I just want, again, some of it's cut and dry. It just is what it is. But I just think it's important that people have the ability, because that 1 out of 100 situation comes up where really it does apply, so.
So I will say that projects that are subject to minor site plan review involve development or construction. All of them, there's not any that don't. But I'm completely okay with deleting it, it's not necessary.
Well, I mean, what if you, and again, this would be one of those situations where it's a no-brainer in some respect, but you call on somebody, it's time, hey, you got sidewalk to the right of you, to the left of you, it's your turn. But who knows what the situation may be, that they would have maybe the ability to just, they want to appeal it. Gonna lose, whatever, it's just their right to appeal.
Well, that's a different creature. This is talking about, item 7 is talking about granting relief, right? Under our current policy, and I've talked about this in the report, the current policy doesn't say who grants relief. It just has that language that the planning commission shall not grant relief on designated streets. So we have taken all of these requests to you as a planning commission, under that idea that the planning commission should be the body that does this. This proposed policy on item 7 here is proposing to add the ability for the zoning administrator to grant relief in cases of minor site plan review. Because when in 2018, there was no minor site plan. There was no administrative approval of a site plan. That was added in the ordinance that was adopted in 2020 to deal with smaller projects that in the past would have had to come to you and go through the full site plan process. And so we're simply proposing to give the zoning administrator the ability for minor site plans that he has authority over to also be able to grant relief based on this same policy language. The only difference is, in this case, we're saying that if somebody doesn't like his action, let's say he rejects that relief, that they could come to you as a planning commission, and that your say would then be final. So it's not really an appeal, it's simply that they can say, yeah, I want to go to the planning commission and have my say in a public meeting. But this is only for basically minor site plan projects.
Well, if you don't like a decision, you have to appeal it.
So but what I'm saying is it's not about, I think if I understood you correctly, you're talking about a case where we might be calling in that temporary relief.
I guess anything, but you're telling me that doesn't really apply to this.
It does not.
My example doesn't apply.
No.
But
it
I'll
doesn't.
still say, as long as there is, if you're telling me number 7 is fine as it is, where an applicant or developer can come in and to the planning commission and maybe a request, whatever, appeal, whatever the decision was made, then I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah,
totally
it's-
fine with
yeah,
that.
Exactly. It's very limited. It's simply giving the zoning administrator the same authority that you have had under the 2018 policy, giving it to him solely for these minor site plans where he has the final say on the site plan. But as I said, giving the ability of an applicant, if they don't like what he says about relief, they can come to you and ask.
That's all I ask.
Good.
Thanks.
I guess I have another question about that then. How is that gonna be made apparent to the applicant? Because I think we had an instance before when someone was concerned that, yeah, the option was there for something, but they didn't really realize it, even though, yeah, it's listed on the website. And anyone can look up all these things, but that maybe that communication in itself isn't enough for people to realize that they have that ability to request that discussion.
Well, the current 2018 policy is on our website. It's part of the zoning and planning section. It's right there with the zoning ordinance and other things. And if we update it, the new policy would be right prominently placed as the same way. As I said, with any applicant, we certainly walk them through all of these details, just as we walk them through the options that they have related to landscaping or other things where, where, for example, landscaping section gives you the ability to approve a modified plan, so an alternative standard, or landscaping standard, under certain conditions. So if they are concerned about that, or they're thinking, well, hey, we just don't think we can make the standard, what you have work, we'll tell them, we say, well, look at this section, 10.7 modifications. You can propose something different. You just need to follow what that section says and make your case to the planning commission. And we will help them make that case. We're happy to help people in whatever way we can to make their best case when they come before you with things. And we do the same thing with the temporary relief. Sometimes we get site plans that will request temporary relief, but they don't base it on the 2018 policy. We say, well, look, go back, look at this policy. We think that subsection B or C or whatever probably applies to this case. But you need to say that, so that there's something the planning commission can hang their hat on to grant the relief. So it is certainly an education
So it's a guided
process.
process. It's
Oh,
not
absolutely.
just good luck to you, look on the website if you want to figure out all these policies that you've never seen or heard of in your entire
No,
life.
it's always a guided process. Right? Much of what we do is education
Mhm.
and helping people, and sometimes handholding to help them be successful in what they need to do.
Thank you.
I have a question about section B on page 48. The language that's being proposed to be struck includes the wording "with frontage along the designated streets." The proposed language doesn't narrow it to that particular audience in terms of the temporary relief. Should it?
I'll ask your question again. I'm not sure I understood it.
So the part that's being struck, that first paragraph, it says, the planning commission will not grant a developer owner of a parcel with frontage along the designated streets. When you take that section out, it reads just temporary relief may be granted under the following circumstances, but it doesn't reference the designated streets, the
No.
frontage on the designated streets. So that's just any sidewalk anywhere,
Right.
or temporary relief from these designated streets.
Well, the current policy basically says no on designated streets. Right? So by taking that out, we're saying that on any street, including a designated street or road, that somebody can ask for that temporary relief. Let's use Mr. Beebe's example down here where he built the sidewalk on Broomfield Road, a designated street in the 2018 policy. If this policy was in place, he could see that he has the option to grant, request that temporary relief. It's not calling out designated streets and saying you can't do that there. Where we brought designated streets back in is item 6 on the following page. We have the first 5 are all policies for when relief is appropriate. Item 6 then says, for parcels with frontage on a designated road, such relief may be granted based on any of the above 5, provided that also that a paved shoulder equivalent improvement of at least 4 feet in width either exists or is basically about to be constructed. And this is really getting at Broomfield Road. It also would apply in places like Mission Road and other areas where that it might be a designated road, but doesn't have sidewalks right now. But Broomfield is a good example. That's a road where it has paved shoulders, 6 feet wide generally. They were constructed with financial support from the Township Board of Trustees and also our Economic Development Authority Board and the tribe. So what this is saying is in that circumstance where there is essentially some kind of pedestrian improvement, that the relief could be granted even if it's on a designated road. I will tell you the reason the language is written this way is that the County Road Commission would get very cranky. I'm sorry, I keep looking at you whenever I say the Road Commission's getting cranky. I don't mean to. But they would get cranky if we called their paved shoulders a pedestrian improvement. They absolutely say that is not a pedestrian improvement. They don't care if somebody walks on it or bike rides on it. To them, it's just a paved shoulder. So we see it as a pedestrian or bicyclist improvement.
Is that-
language is.
I'm sorry. Is that because you associate him with the road commission or with
I think I
crankiness?
associate him with the county,
I think
actually.
it's cranky.
Oh,
I
county.
think that's what,
Okay.
but it's unconscious, completely unconscious, because of course you're not.
Well, I would argue in some of the rural areas that those gravel roads are not improved.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
they're not perfect, but the road commission absolutely puts a lot of maintenance into it, so.
How do you look at, this is a separate question, the same section, but just help me understand the difference between a provisional relief and a temporary relief. When I see temporary, I keep thinking, oh, they're gonna come and get me for this sidewalk eventually, right? So, yeah, is there a recourse for extended or permanent relief from this? Or is it just, I'm gonna wait and see what happens until, help me understand that.
So, as I said, it's a general ordinance, simply requires sidewalks to be constructed. We really don't have the ability in a policy that's implemented that ordinance to throw out that ordinance and say, we're granting permanent relief. Temporary relief, for the most part, has been indefinite. Under the 2018 policy, there was some language that talked about when relief should be called in. And in fact, the temporary relief on 7 or 8 properties was called in 2020 or 2021. In this case, by action of the Board of Trustees, as I recall correctly, I think. Yeah. And staff was asked to facilitate getting those sidewalks constructed. Ultimately, 2 of those, the 2 on Remus Road, the relief was granted again. Those were the 2 that although there was a non-designated street, they were granted relief again, because it was found that they really, for practical purpose, they couldn't construct it without doing off-site improvements. There were some others that, frankly, we're still working on them. There's a condo project just down the road here in Lincoln, where the developer is no longer the picture. The condos are owned by the homeowners, and nobody has any money, and nobody has really any authority to construct the sidewalks. So from a practical standpoint, we're at an impasse in trying to get them constructed. It is an area that happens to be in our West EDA district. In all likelihood, at some point, the West EDA will, when we get the sidewalk to that point, we'll just construct that section. Anyway, so right now, at this point, temporary relief is indefinite. And I would expect it to remain that way, unless, as this language says, there are certain cases where the relief should be changed based on a change in conditions, like sidewalks and constructed up to the other side of the property, so now it's time to finish the job.
Does temporary relief extend when there's a transfer of ownership?
The relief runs with the land, not with the owner.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
But the term provisional or temporary, they essentially are the same definition, defined, same term. We have used temporary, and so that, although the 2018 policy says provisional, or it says provisional or temporary in a few cases, our actions have been to use the word temporary. So that's why this update, we simply call it temporary.
Part of the issue is that why we need this and why it's important is because, I mean, we have a very ambitious list of designated roads and a vision of having all these connectivities. But the fact is that significant stretches of these roads run through rural areas, or at least by farmland. And so, you know, we do have these situations where you have to look at it and say, does it really make sense to insist on the sidewalk being built in this location at a particular time? I just wanted to ask, just because, you know, I don't know, to make sure I understand it and whatnot. But so suppose I'm a business owner, I live on one of the designated roads, and I want to do something on my property, relatively small. Let's say it's going to cost me $20,000. But I have enough frontage that if I were to build the sidewalk, it would be, say, $80,000. Then under number 3, if the total cost of the sidewalk exceeds 50% of the estimated cost of the project, in this case more than 100%, that would qualify.
Yep.
Okay. But because it's on a designated road, then I'd come down to number 6, and it would also have to be true that there's that paved shoulder or equivalent improvement.
Yep.
Now, it says exists along 50% or more of the surveyed sections of the township along the roads fronting the proposed development. What does that mean?
Well, it's basically, does it exist in the area of this property? Does it, I mean, that's really what the language is.
But
it might not be it might not be contiguous to the whole area, but
Yeah.
at least half of the section.
Well, how far does the section extend, I guess is what I'm
Well, each
asking.
section of the township is a mile square, so along that road, it would be along that mile section, basically.
Okay.
If you finished your thought, can I add on to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Going back to number 3, and I'll use Mr. Gunning's project as an example. We didn't read past the comma there. So yes, as proposed, the 50% of the total estimated cost of the construction would be exceeded. However, there's this language that says as prepared by a project engineer or architect. Now, I guess I'm curious as to, that can add substantial cost to a project, and if we look at something like the construction of a pole barn, is a project engineer or an architect necessary to build a pole barn?
What we're looking for, if we do the same standard for other types of projects, we're looking for somebody that has that expertise to provide their opinion. That opinion could be a one-paragraph letter that says, based on the cost per foot to construct a sidewalk X number of feet wide at this location, we estimate that this sidewalk would cost this many $1,000. Period. We're not looking for an engineered site plan.
No,
It's
but I'm talking about,
an estimate.
isn't the as prepared by project engineer, that's talking about the project construction. That's not talking about the sidewalk construction, correct?
No, it's talking about the sidewalk, how much the sidewalk is going to cost.
The cost of a sidewalk construction is as project,
Generally,
as prepared by.
The project is, the cost of the project is generally known because, for example, when you apply for a building permit, most building permits are based, the fee is based on the cost of construction. So in most cases, the cost of construction is something that is easily addressed. I mean, for example, if they're building a pole barn, they have a budget. They know how much it's going to cost to build that pole barn because they have to write the check for it.
So I guess I find the wording here problematic, only just the layout of it, because when I'm reading, if the cost of the sidewalk or pathway construction exceeds 50% of the estimated total project construction cost, comma, as prepared by the project engineer or architect, when I'm reading that, I'm associating that's joining the prepared by project engineer, that's joining it with the project construction, total project construction. It's not joining, I don't read it as joining it with the construction of the sidewalk.
Keep in mind, frankly, that both of those are necessary. We need to know the cost of the sidewalk, an estimate, and we need to know the cost of the project in order to figure out if that sidewalk is 50% of the
Right.
project cost.
Right, but, and I'm not trying to be difficult, but if
You're suggesting that a builder can provide the project cost.
a builder or even someone who is simply, I mean, I built my own barn. Ben probably would have built his own barn. I can just go get a materials list and provide a cost. I'm not, but you know what I mean? So I'm just saying.
Well, but your materials list doesn't reflect really the cost to construct either. Your time has value. I understand. You could artificially get the cost way down by saying, hey, I'm doing it myself at no cost. But it really is not no cost. But I'm happy not to argue that point. I don't want to argue about what should be in a project cost or not, because as I said, we can simply look at what is the building code say a construction cost involved, if we want to do that. I'm happy to rewrite.
The only thing to me is it sounds like when we say project engineer that somebody has to pay a project engineer to either create plans when blueprints may or may not be needed for the project, number one, and that there's a cost to that. And number two, I agree when you say the cost of sidewalk or pathway could be a paragraph from a local developer that says, yeah, this is what, by square footage, this is what it would, a rough estimate of what it might cost to build the pathway. I just would want to make sure that it just seems like it implies that somebody has to develop their cost from a project engineer is all.
Well,
So-
but in terms of a sidewalk, we want an expert that can tell us what it's actually going to cost.
But again, I'm
So-
talking about the project construction, the project, not the sidewalk
I'm happy
construction.
to clarify that.
Yeah.
So technically,
Not a
the
problem.
sentence is correct, because the subject of the sentence is the cost of the sidewalk or pathway construction. That's the subject of the sentence, and the part that we're talking about is describing that, not the estimated total project construction. So it is correct, but there could be maybe a way to express it differently so that nobody associates the word total project construction with project engineer architect.
Yeah, I can work it. Largely, in this case, I was trying to work with the existing sentence structure, and I absolutely can revise that to make it clear that we're talking about the engineer architect is providing the estimate on the sidewalk, not on the project. That's easily fixed, and I'm making that to fix it.
I had a couple other questions. I guess I'll do this one first. So in your memo, under easements, you say to add a guideline that the planning commission should work with applicants to try to secure recorded necessary easements for sidewalk or pathway construction, even in cases where temporary relief is granted. The only place I see in the proposed policy that deals with easements is at the bottom of page 3, and my reading of it just says that if we grant a relief, that the landowner needs to authorize and record any easements, et cetera.
Well, but that such relief should be made contingent. As I said, should is important here.
Yeah.
And right, it does not speak to the plan commission specifically here because frankly, that we brought in the zoning administrator, Peter Gallen brought to me the question about minor site plan. And I'd actually written part of that report, I think I've written that section, and we said, oh, we need to deal with that question of minor site plan and administrative approval.
Yeah.
So that, if I had to write that report, that section of the report again now, I would have said, plan commission and the zoning administrator should encourage kind of this language.
Okay.
But
Well-
this is really just simply about trying to encourage developers, applicants to provide that easement
Okay.
voluntarily.
Okay. When I saw work with, I was thinking, are we going to be going around knocking on doors begging people for easements?
No.
All right. And I guess the other thing is more of a kind of a broader question, but let's say that it's, again, one of these designated roads where the township has decided long-term, we really would like sidewalk. We have so many properties in the township that were built before, frankly, before the zoning ordinance, before anything, right? And so, what if you had a situation where a property existed with things built on it that were, let's say, non-conforming uses that don't have the required setbacks, blah, 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 and somebody would have to like move their building or do something really kind of outrageous in order to accommodate a sidewalk? What's the thinking there?
Well, where it cannot be done, it cannot be done. One of the, I'll give you an example. Now, this is slightly different, but it's in the same realm. I mentioned that section of Crawford north of Pickard up to Mission Creek Park, which right now is a designated street, and I suggest we remove it because there's a city-led project to construct a sidewalk north of Pickard up to the Mission Creek Park. That the township is financially participating. The Board of Trustees has committed money to that. Initially, we were looking at constructing that sidewalk on the west side of the road, on the side where the former Indian boarding school is, the Tribones, the Chippewa Indian Tribones. And it was a practical thing that was an easier place to work. But then we realized we'd have to construct it well into their tribal lands. Because of the topography on much of that area, it was difficult to get it in the road right away. And so the decision was made by the city to look at the east side. And they went to Mr. Coyne, Dave Coyne, Coyne Oil, and talked with him about an easement on his property to be able to make it work. So they're absolutely, it's impractical to get the sidewalk in, something else has to be done. It simply may not be constructed. You can, I mean, if it's a curbed road and there is space between the front of that building and the curb, you can construct a sidewalk in that, within that space. Maybe there's only 5 feet. Well, you can construct a 5-foot wide sidewalk that would go from the curb to the building, if it's in the road right of way. So sometimes it's simply adjusting where that sidewalk will go. We have a stretch down here, another condo project, not one that was obligated to put a sidewalk in, but it's on this side of the road. When they built it, they planted trees, evergreen trees, to screen the buildings. And they must have planted them right on the right-of-way line. And of course, over the years, those very small trees that were probably just a few inches into the right-of-way when they were planted are now 30 feet tall and have grown almost out to the curb. And for us to construct a sidewalk along the west side of Lincoln, going all the way down to Remus Road, we would either have to take those trees down or shave half of them to remove the blockage, or we have to slide the sidewalk right up to the curb and run it right down the curb line of the road in that stretch. If we build that sidewalk, I'm betting that that's what we'll do, because that's a lot easier than taking those trees down or trimming them. So adjustments are made. There's always issues with that. We have a project right now to connect Jameson Park to M20 Pickard Road. In fact, our EDA board just this evening approved the contract for that project. There's one house in the way. Most of that house's front yard is in the road right of way. In fact, the road right of way comes up, I think, 2 feet from the house. And now we could run the sidewalk 2 feet from the house, technically. We're not going to do that. We are going to have to remove a few improvements they have, but the sidewalk is being cheated out near the road to go around the house. And so it's good. There's a section of fence that'll have to be taken down that is almost right into the roadway. But other than that, we simply are adjusting the location to go around that house.
Other questions from commissioners?
I don't know if it's a question, but it's more of a comment. I have, under section B, the policy for granting temporary relief, I've had a long-standing concern with number 2. I have a difficulty in supporting it as it's written, just because we've had multiple applicants lean on the notion that if less than 50% of the surveyed section has sidewalks, then they should be granted relief as well. That is effectively a, that's effectively a way of essentially preventing any sidewalks from being built whatsoever, because what it's saying is if you're the first to build a sidewalk, you can ask for relief and not build the sidewalk. So I'm not sure. I do appreciate the fact that if you're the only one in the section that's being asked to build a sidewalk, I do appreciate the fact that there should be consideration for that. But the consideration should be based on the applicant and the nature of the project, the size of the frontage, the local residential next to it, the people that would be accessing that, that sort of thing. I think what we've had, and we've actually, if memory serves, I think we've had attorneys here before tell us that, hey, it's in your policy that says if less than 50% of the section has sidewalks, then you grant relief, even though it says it's may grant relief. It's not shall grant relief. So I find this language problematic, and I struggle with that. I don't have a solution to present for it, but I struggle with the notion of giving that like an escape clause that basically says if you're the first one being asked to do it, that you don't have to do it.
Well, it doesn't have. This is your policy. You're recommending it to the board. We can remove it. We have added item 1. That covers a lot of the ground for the more rural areas of the township, that language gets us a lot of the direction of where you're going, and so item 2 is less significant from that perspective, and it could be deleted as if there's a consensus to remove it.
Would it? I mean, I can see if it were 49%, you're well on your way to getting, full coverage. Whereas if it's, 10 or 20% or even 25%, it's more like the kind of sidewalk to nowhere sort of thing. So would reducing the threshold be helpful?
I mean, I've never liked the idea of the sidewalk to nowhere. I think that's a misnomer. The example that I would point back to, and I know, Phil, you were here. I don't know if anybody else was here in the commission or not at the time we had the conversation. But when Riverwood was asked to build a sidewalk, now we can debate. They had a barn burned down, and they rebuilt a barn, and that triggered a sidewalk conversation. And there was an extensive conversation about whether or not a sidewalk should be built across the entire frontage of their property. I was openly in support of doing it. Ultimately, it didn't pass. But the argument that I made, one of the arguments that was used was that there were no other sidewalks anywhere, and it was a sidewalk to nowhere. And the argument I made was I disagreed, because there were 2 substantial subdivisions on either side of the golf course that would be connected for biking and walking, and connection between those 2 subdivisions, the population centers, on the south side of town, and that's not a sidewalk to nowhere. That is a connection to residential areas. And so any percentage that's more than 1%, given the sidewalks in that particular area, would provide justification for relief. And again, merit of the project aside, it was worthy of conversation as to whether or not the unique circumstances there warranted a sidewalk or a pathway. And I just don't see how we give such an easy out if there are unique circumstances like that that may truly necessitate being the first person to build the sidewalk. But again, I don't have a solution for, outside of just a case-by-case basis by the planning commission, I don't have a solution for how we, I don't know how we can quantify that, how we quantify who has to be the first person to go. It's one of those things where you just maybe you know it when you see it. So,
If I may just offer something to this particular topic. First one, to this policy, River would be covered by item 1. They're in an area designated rural preservation or rural buffer. I can't recall which right offhand, but it's one or the other. So they could come in under number 1 and request relief solely because they're in that space. This is also where our master plan may be helpful. As part of our master plan, we're going to be updating, we have a sidewalk map. We are going to be updating that to look at areas where we want to have sidewalks and pathways constructed, especially pathways. And to my mind, Broomfield Road heading out that direction is a fantastic location for a pathway. But this would not be something constructed piece by piece. This would be something constructed along the lines of the pathway that goes down to Shepherd. It'd be part of the regional pathway network. But it makes perfect sense to have that, both because, frankly, partly because of Riverwood. It's a destination. It has unique recreational elements that having a pathway that gets there is not a bad idea. But also for the reason you said, because it would connect some of these subdivisions that are along the river there, and give them that connection through. If we did that, then we probably want to look at connecting that pathway on into town, along the rest of Broomfield. But anyway, that may be something where, even if we're granting relief, because it is rural, if item 1 is added to our policy, then they can propose it just simply because it's in an area intended to remain rural. But we could, as part of our master plan, we could identify that as a high priority for the pathway project, which could then lead to seeking out grants and other funding potentially to construct it.
I mean, that's a good point, and it does lead to another observation that I made as well. I do think at the time, and it's been a while ago, and I'm not as young as I used to be, but I think at the time, the language that we had, I can't remember if we actually had policy language. Well, I guess we must have. But the option of a pathway for Riverwood was muddy at best. They were being asked for a sidewalk, and the pathway was not something that was being really considered. And I guess we'd have to go back to minutes to kind of figure out why that was the case. So, but when I'm reading that section D there, it's the very last section, part D, where sidewalks and pathways are required to be constructed in the township. This is something that I think is worthy of conversation at some point. Where sidewalks and pathways are required to be constructed in the township, a pathway design shall be preferred wherever a road corridor or the other area of the township is designated on a township planning document for planned future pathway construction. So this is, to me, this reads kind of like a chicken and the egg. Which one comes first? Is this language saying that if we haven't already identified it in some other planning document, like a master plan or something like that, that we can't simply offer the alternative as a body and offer the alternative of this makes sense to be a pathway?
No, this language is doing what the title says, is designate the areas where a pathway should be what is constructed. We talked about in the report that right now our policy doesn't say where we choose a sidewalk versus a pathway. What this is simply saying is tying right back to our planning documents and say where those planning documents say we ought to have a pathway, then where we require it, the design should be a pathway. That's all it's saying, is that the
So,
design should be a pathway.
so could somebody, let's say that the Riverwood situation happened again, and let's say that we haven't, let's say it happens next week and it's on our agenda next month, and we haven't done anything to designate that as maybe a priority for a pathway. Could the applicant come to us and just simply say, hey, I know I have to build a sidewalk here, not something non-motorized, I'm suggesting that I build a pathway. Could we then, would this policy enable us to approve a pathway as an alternative, or would we be required, because it's not designated as such, would we be required to build a sidewalk?
Yeah, both our current ordinance, the proposed ordinance, the 2018 policy, this policy would give you as a planning commission, we're really talking about a site plan project, something that's coming to you because of some kind of development. Absolutely, you could say, yes, we would accept a pathway design that meets the sidewalk ordinance design standards.
Okay.
You could do that right now. The policies and ordinance that are in place right now would allow you to do that.
So if a section had 47%, let's say different things had happened through the years, and we've given relief to 47%. Now another person in this section, business will say is building or whatever they're doing, and it's required for them to put it in, now it goes over 50%. Then do you call everybody in?
That's what this says. That's what the current policy says. Yeah. If they need to construct within the current policy says 1 year, we simply changed it to calendar days, but that's what the current policy says.
So, in that sense, it might be less than 50%, and that only might be the only piece of that section. But if through time we've given relief, and now you're over 50%, according to how we've said, it's gonna call them all in.
And
And then
if
you
you're
get your
lucky,
sidewalk.
if you're lucky, your grandkids might get to use that sidewalk.
Right.
Like, these are 100-year projects, timelines. I'm not a
Your
fan of.
grandkids might get to pay for that.
Right, right.
But also though, they're in locations where there's probably not much activity.
I mean, again, it's, the point of a planning commission, I mean, we're imbued with the right to plan how our community looks, acts, and operates, and if the goal, and we've heard the feedback from our residents, it's only one of the few universal feedbacks that we've gotten is that they want more non-motorized access, walkways, pathways, biking, that sort of thing. That was across most demographics that they want that, and I struggle to see, and again, I get it, I'm not bringing a solution to the table, but I just don't like the idea that we would defer construction of sidewalks just simply the sole reason being that nobody else has a sidewalk yet. There's gotta be a better way to approach, because how do you enact that realization within a generation or even 2 generations? You can't. You're talking about building up something for potentially taking decades to get to a threshold where it suddenly says everybody has to do it. And we've been trying to call in projects for 4 or 5 years now, and Rodney just described half the projects that we're not able to call in yet. So it'll take 25 more years on trying to get those projects we do call in. So it feels like, that's just my take on it.
Short of funding it a different way.
I mean, it's implicit in our, not just Union Township, but it's implicit across the state of Michigan and probably most jurisdictions in the United States that when business owners make large changes or additions or construction projects, that part of the public infrastructure is funded by business owners. We're not unique in that sense. And we're trying to be reasonable. We're trying to identify ways that are reasonable and triggers that are reasonable for differentiating between small projects and large projects, but we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater and saying, hey, we're not going to set an expectation that there isn't a threshold of projects that just simply require that sidewalk construction or pathway construction.
So as Rodney said, it is our policy that we're ultimately sending on to the board to hopefully approve. So if someone wants to make a motion and make a recommendation as part of their motion, or an editorial change, they can do that.
I would offer one more comment, and this is just my take. I personally, I mean, I shudder at the thought of recommending approval of a policy with a single review, one night's review on it. And I know that we've had conversation about it. I personally would like to see just from a visual perspective, I would like to see the designated roads on a map, that we can have a conversation as a planning commission to look at what that looks like on a map and determine whether or not we see anything that's either unnecessarily added or is not added as a designated road. I think there is opportunity for a couple of these things to have more planning commission conversation about it. So I'm perfectly comfortable continuing to put this as an agenda item, and I'm perfectly comfortable delaying any recommendation today on this policy.
I think I would agree with Commissioner Buckley on that. I think we've talked this for about a little over an hour now, and I still think there's an awful lot of questions that everybody has. Just, I'm speaking for myself and maybe reading the room a little bit, that I think if we talk about this a little bit more, it might be helpful.
Do either of you have a motion I can second or third? Or you're making one?
Is that a motion?
Yeah, I mean, I'll make a motion to, I mean, what would we table it for, I mean,
Just postpone action.
postpone action on it? Yeah, I'd make a motion to postpone action pending further conversation, review of the details of the policy, with the intention that we'd be keeping it on our agenda for future meetings.
I support that.
Okay, motion was made by Buckley, it was seconded by Shingles to postpone action on this, I guess essentially till our July meeting. And then we can, assuming the motion passes, then we can indicate what additional information we know now that we want relative to the subsequent consideration.
If I may ask a quick logistical question for your July meeting. I gave you the marked up copy, obviously it was very marked up. Are you comfortable with me giving you back the clean draft with the changes we've talked about today? So you would see the clean draft version, and then highlighted on that would be the things we've already talked about changing.
I'm comfortable with that.
Comfortable with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you'd like to, so you have access to the old language that's been deleted out, we can attach the 2018 policy to the next agenda, just so you can reference it that way if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, we'll plan on that.
And I mean, I would recommend, I know in the past, Phil, you've gone through and I know this is policy and not ordinance, but in the past, when we're looking at ordinance, we'd go through kind of section by section or line by line and just kind of give each one a review and see if there's question or comments. And I like going through it like that. And if we have to stick a pin in something and say, all right, well, we need more information about it, then so be it. But it gives us a chance to go from start to finish. And I am curious too, I know we have a motion on the table now, but I am curious as to what type of public input we could possibly get for something like this, even prior to recommending it to the board. Or does it the public meeting, if it goes to the board before they make a decision, is there a public meeting for that? Or, I mean, is there a way for us to solicit feedback on this prior to essentially adopting it as policy?
Well, there's a number of things we could do. We can post an announcement on our website that it's not a hearing, but we can post an announcement that says the Plan Commission will be reviewing this proposed policy at their July meeting, something to that effect. And I would be leery of going to the point of advertising in the newspaper like we would do for a hearing.
Yeah.
But there's actually no reason why we can't post an announcement.
I mean, I think it would be nice to see an announcement, and if we could get feedback, Mr. Gunning may have feedback, and he may have friends that have feedback. I'd like to give people a chance to talk while we're in the deliberation phase.
But then if that item's on the agenda, people who come to the meeting to talk about that wouldn't be able to do so until the end of
You're
the
right.
meeting when we've already done it.
true.
Unless we postpone again.
Would we?
But the other thing I can say to you is that this is ultimately Township's policy. And you are, as I said earlier, you are among the owners of the township from the perspective of that policy governance. And you are representative of the communities and the neighborhoods and such that you live in, that you connect with. So that's actually, I mean, it's one of the part of the language of the Michigan Planning Enabling Act, that each plan commissioner, there should be variety in geography, variety in employment, variety in a number of ways, in many ways as possible, to have a full range of opinions. So you do represent the interests that you are connected to. So we simply post it on the website. You're absolutely right, though, that is a challenge that we really can't do a public hearing on this policy.
Would it be unreasonable when you do if we were to do an announcement on the website that it's on the agenda, would it be unreasonable to simply state that feedback, I mean, the packet would be released anyways, feedback on the proposed policy may be submitted in writing ahead of the meeting?
Yeah.
And that way we would at least have some mechanism for somebody to speak up?
Unless the item is postponed until the August meeting and people can comment at the July meeting, right? Because there is something to the personal interaction versus reading a ton more information in a short period of time. It depends on how much feedback you think you might get and how valuable that feedback might be.
And the other thing I would say is that, as was done in relation to the private road ordinance, if you as a planning commission decide you'd like to invite somebody to speak, you have every right to do that. Basically goes to the chair can invite anybody who wishes to speak. So if somebody comes to the meeting and wants to, as long as the chair invites them to do that, they certainly can. So.
I only did it because Commissioner Buckley wasn't here to give me the evil eye.
Will the policy go before the board before we have a chance to review it again and make a recommendation, or will that wait?
It's going to come to us
Administratively.
first. We'd have to make a motion to
First.
recommend it to the board.
Okay.
And in reality,
Just
before the
take
board sees it, we really need to have the new ordinance in place so
Yeah.
that there's
Okay.
clear authority to do this.
Just wanted to make sure postponing didn't, prevent us from actually being able to do what it is we're hoping to do. Good.
All right, so I think we have that in order. We have a motion to postpone. I do think having a map of the township with the existing designated roads, and then, I don't know, if we could get one that has like the existing designated roads in one color and then what you want to add in another color, that'd be wonderful, but something that we can see. Any further comment? All right, so roll call on the motion, please.
Olver,
Yes.
Thering,
Yes.
Gross,
Yes.
Squadrito,
Yes.
Buckley,
Yes.
McDonald,
Yes.
and Shingles.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. All right. So now we're ready for extended public comment. So this is the part of the meeting where anyone is invited to address the planning commission on any item, whether it was on tonight's agenda or not. Just ask you to give us your name and address for the minutes and limit your comments to 5 minutes. Extended public comments open at 9:22.
Ben Gunning, 2280 East Broomfield Road. I think this was a really good meeting. I think you guys did due diligence. You put good. Obviously, you had put a lot of thought into this. It's important because this makes or breaks sometimes some projects. I do think moving forward. In the policy, it talks about the industrial zones eliminating relief. I think it'd be pertinent to address those concerns or to forward that possible policy recommendation to business owners that are in those industrial zones. In some cases, I think a sidewalk would be, I try to picture, I think it's corporate, I believe, that goes into Fishers. I don't see how in the world you would have a sidewalk on that stretch of road. That wouldn't make much sense to me. I think there's some areas where maybe possibly on the east side, if the DDAs are willing to have some money involved in it, then possibly. But I don't think you can just put a blanket on that. And I think they should have the ability to be able to appeal or ask for relief. So that would be my first concern. Number two, in Commissioner Shingles' correspondence that was in your packet, he talked about the committee. I fully understand that one. There was a period of time with that committee where when I was supervisor, I would ask for an update on it, and I'd find out that they didn't have a quorum. I don't know how many meetings that group actually had, and I believe, Stan, this was before possibly I cornered you in the soup aisle at Kroger's and talked you into being on this board. But I look at the map on that and, you know, what side of the road do you want it on? Do you want sidewalks on the north side of the road? Do you want it on the south side of the road? I mean, I try to cross that road to go to the neighbor's house, and sometimes I have to wait 5-6 minutes for the traffic to clear because there's so much traffic on that road now. So you can't expect people to hopscotch, and it's unrealistic to have sidewalks on both sides, particularly in that stretch of road. So what side does it need to be on? And Rodney talked about a pathway. You know, linking, I think that's a wonderful idea, linking the neighborhoods, Meadowbrook all the way through to Lincoln. I think it's a great idea. In fact, that was something that if Commissioner Buckley remembers is that you and I had discussed that at one point in time. And of course, you know, the way that the board worked at that time is you couldn't actually come up with ideas. So if you did come up with an idea like that, you got spanked down pretty hard, which happened to me multiple times, because you're just supposed to sit there and smile and you know, just vote on stuff that they put on your table. So I love the way you guys handled things tonight. You took the bull by the horns. I think that you took charge, which is what you needed to do. And I think the Board of Trustees also needs to take charge. And next week I'm going to be at their meeting because there's some things in that private road ordinance that I don't like, and I think it's unfair, and it's not well thought out. So you guys are going to be seeing me. You're going to be seeing me next week. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
No one online.
Online, okay. Okay, so we thank the public for their comments. Go ahead and close extended public comment at 9:27. Final board comment. Any comments from board members? Do you think it was a good meeting, good productive meeting? So we will, we've completed our agenda, so we'll stand in adjournment until our July meeting. So enjoy the hot weather.
Aha.